An unusual one today, as we're going to veer off into a decisive but very brief tangent to look at something else. This doesn't represent a change in the plan or anything at all like that, so the next episode of Reading Through the Bible will be on Wednesday next week, as usual. For this, though, I've been reading other things, and you don't have to be swimming around for very long in the pool, as it were, of atheism versus theism before you come across the God Delusion. Over 3 million people have read this, and it's well reviewed on Amazon. So I thought I would give that a little go, and maybe that will spare you all from my next 250 videos. I should add, I realise it's nearly 20 years old now, but I don't think anything's massively moved on in the field of theology or anything like that. So I think its content is just as relevant today or irrelevant today as it was relevant or irrelevant back in 2006 when it came out. So we'll have a look anyway and see what we think. It takes a while for the point of the book to emerge in terms of why is Richard Dawkins even bothering to write it. And it feels initially like it's a bit like someone trying to spoil someone else's party because they don't have one of their own. But he does eventually get to the point that it seems to be that he's anti-fundamentalism and anti-faith without reason. And on the basis, yeah, fine, fair enough, I can work with that. That seems like a reasonable thing to have a shout about. Much of the book is aimed at the creationist level of the argument for the existence of God, that being basically the belief that the story of Adam and Eve is literally true. I don't think many people actually believe I don't think many Christians believe that the story of Adam and Eve is literally true. Aimed at them and also the people who want to fly planes into buildings and chop people's heads off, that sort of crowd. But 3 million people have read this book, but I don't think there are that many people who think that God told them to go and blow people up and stuff. So I do wonder if it's slightly aimed at a crowd that doesn't really exist for practical purposes. There's an odd bit in one point in the book where Dawkins talks about he doesn't like to do live debates with creationists, which doesn't seem to make a lot of sense because the book is only really arguing against creationists. You get someone who doesn't say, oh no, I don't believe Adam and Eve was true anyway, or literally true at least, then he's got nothing to say almost. So it's a little bit odd in that respect. But as I've said previously, my father was a vicar and had no problem with the idea of evolution and that Adam and Eve wasn't literally true and all the rest of it. So the majority of the arguments in this book are taking aim at a very low standard of argument for the existence of God, and is only really problematic to anybody who's absolutely adamant that the world was created 6,000 years ago on a Tuesday or whatever day it was. And Christians accepting that the story of Adam and Eve is not literally true, I don't think there's any sort of problem to them anyway, so odd. As I said in the introduction video, which I'll link below again, I have no intention for what I'm doing to shake anybody's faith. But I also don't think that the creationist argument is going to convince anybody anyway. Or you might get some short-term converts with some very emotional underpin to their faith. But in terms of proper giving it a shake and reading about it and thinking about it and talking about it, you're not going to convert anybody with that argument, I don't think. So I'm simultaneously in complete agreement with Richard Dawkins that the Earth being 6,000 years old is unlikely, but completely disagree with him that that fact is disproving the existence of God. It reads more like he's cynically, snarkily and somewhat unkindly actually just taking aim at a very basic theory of the existence of God, and it doesn't seem to be any need for it particularly. It feels a little bit like a lawyer going into court and doing the liar, liar, pants on fire defence and then expecting that to convince people. There are a few bits where he seems to mischaracterise an argument that he then responds to. For example, I've come across this argument for the existence of God, which is based on absolute morality. That's quite a difficult word. The argument, as I understand it, in effect actually is that without something that transcends humanity, then there is no objective basis for morality. So, for example, we talk about someone coming along, getting people's heads, taking them off the person, put them on a spike. I would hope we would all agree that that's morally wrong, almost regardless of what the other person has done. But the point, the moral objectivity argument from Christianity is that without a transcendent God, it's just of my opinion that that's wrong. And there's no absolute transcendent right or wrong that's universal or anything like that. Maybe it is only relative. I don't know. It's I think you could make a reasonable case for why that perhaps doesn't necessarily, well, maybe not matter, because you end up with things like holocausts, where whole societies think that sort of thing is okay. But that may be the reality. So I mean, you could make a reasonable argument for that, I think. But Dawkins seems to me to be framing the argument as Christians only behave because of fear of punishment. I think that's completely missing the entire point. Even from my limited experience, having read 4 books of the Bible at this point, in Genesis it was pretty clear that God put within humanity understanding of the right and wrong. That was basically the essence of consciousness. I.e., people aren't not doing things because they're afraid of being punished. They're not doing bad things, generally speaking, because they know they're wrong. I mean, it's sort of simple as that. And yes, there are going to be some outliers, your Hitlers and all the rest of it. And we all do things that are obviously wrong from time to time. But we feel bad about it when we do things wrong, to the extent that we face up to them. And Hitler's kind of rare. It's not like there are a lot of people that bad running around, I hope. So Dawkins doesn't really achieve anything with his argument there at all. I mean, he might have just left that out because he's arguing the wrong argument, which I would tend to agree with the Christians on that one. It would seem reasonable that if you have no transcendent reality, then you don't have objective morality. You have subjective morality. So you put that head on that spike, I'm going to think you're wrong, but someone else might think you're right. And there's no way to determine which of us is correct on that. There's quite a bit in the book about who does and doesn't believe in God, like it matters. I can't see that it matters at all. I suppose it's nice to feel like there's a club, such and such, they agree with me. There's a solidarity in that, I suppose. There's also a suggestion that there's a correlation between intelligence and belief in God, and basically suggesting that only dim-witted people believe in God. There wasn't any data for that, though, so that seemed to be another one of Dawkins' opinions. There's no shortage of those in this book, whether they're relevant or not. I obviously realise the irony of a bloke on YouTube criticising someone for giving their opinion on something, but I'd like to think that I'm trying to keep my opinions on this relevant to what we're doing. Apparently, though, Albert Einstein being an atheist matters to Dawkins, and Adolf Hitler being allegedly a Christian matters, because then his actions are representative of the whole of religion. Doesn't really stack up, I think. And either way, the argument that Hitler was a Christian is a bit like me saying I'm vegan when I had a burger for lunch. You can say it all you like, but proof of what you are is in what you do, isn't it? Who said that? Batman, yes. You can label things how you like, but if that label conflicts with reality, then it's not a useful label, is it? So there's a couple of bits I did agree with him on. One being, there seems to be his sense that there are a lot of people who claim to be religious but don't actually believe in God in the actual personal sense. I sort of got that impression as well from people. I have nothing to back it up with, and ultimately, who cares anyway? I mean, I don't think that's not evidence either way for anything other than evidence perhaps for how people can be a little bit crap. And he also raised the interesting point of people drawn to faith because they want it to be true, and that, I think, for me is one of the key objections. It'd be nice if it was true, and when we die we don't just go into the ground and get eaten by worms, isn't it? So I think you have got to be suspicious of any sort of feeling of these things being right. And it does seem human nature does incorporate some sort of looking towards the divine, which perfectly reasonably, if we were all created by God, then they could put that in us and it would be like a homing beacon, as it were. But equally, if we were not created, is it not perfectly reasonable to think that we could just be led astray by that? I'm always slightly sceptical, I think, when people talk about being moved by God or something, and just that feels like there's a lot of scope for interpretation. Yeah, any sort of reliance on a feeling telling you that God is real, I would be personally deeply sceptical of. So I can work with Richard Dawkins on that one, I think. I couldn't help but contrast Richard Dawkins with other atheists, like Professor Brian Cox I've seen talking about why he doesn't believe in God, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Stephen Hawking before he died. And Dawkins at the beginning of the book makes his point that he doesn't like the way that religion gets this extra level of respect that it's not necessarily deserving of. You can say whatever you like and then call it your religious beliefs, and you're left alone, even if you're saying something really stupid. I have some sympathy for that, but those others aren't tiptoeing around their points or anything, and they're making some really formidable points. Just in the process, they're making the point that you don't have to be a twat to people about it. He does have a central thesis in the book, which you could summarise broadly and slightly oddly as the appearance of the design in the universe does not necessarily imply there's a God, therefore there's probably no God. It's got a little feeling of circularity about it, so it's not going to convince anybody. And there's a bit more detail in the bullet points he breaks it down in, but that's my understanding of how that summarises, oddly enough. But I don't think anyone is arguing that the universe existing is the proof for the existence of God. I think that's potentially part of it for some, certainly. And where my feeling is it at least raises the question, even if it doesn't actually suggest any particularly useful answers, it's in and of itself, which I guess is that whole God of the gaps thing. I don't like that at all. It seems very lazy. There's we can't explain this, therefore God did it. I think that's not going to win anything. But again, that's the level of argument that Dawkins is responding to. So it's not particularly useful for us. Overall, therefore, it didn't bring anything particularly useful, and indeed could have been several hundred pages shorter, I think, for all it's added. I don't quite understand why it's so popular. I don't know, I guess if you're not thinking hard about the subject, then someone coming along and saying these things, maybe that could be convincing. But it doesn't take much to dismantle everything in that, even if you're just a bloke on YouTube who's read 4 books of the Bible and had to think about it for 3 months or whatever it's been. I even at one point, the thought occurred to me, could he be a secret Christian? And actually he's doing a big book, because I gather this was a huge deal back when it came out, and it seems like a lot of people have heard of it. And so he gets a debate started with a really feeble argument that any Christian with half a brain can come along and completely dismantle. So I think he's probably not, because he does seem pretty adamant that he doesn't really like Christians. But that's, I think the book generally would seem to say more about Richard Dawkins than it says about the chances that there is a God who created the universe. But yeah, so it smells very good. I'm very partial to books. Hence I have books instead of Kindles because they smell better. But we'll give that, I think, an F+ and move on and see if we can find something a bit more useful.